My name is Mark Ellison. I'm 34 years old, and I've never been married, never had children of my own, but for the last 10 years, I've been a single father in every way that matters, not because I planned it, but because one morning, my sister left her newborn on my doorstep and vanished from my life. No note, no explanation, just a crying infant wrapped in a thin blanket, his little fists clenched as though even then he knew the world could be cruel. At first, I thought there had to be some mistake. I called her phone. It went straight to voicemail. I called my parents, panicked, asking if they knew where she was. Their response still echoes in my mind, cold and matter-of-fact. She's your burden now. They didn't ask about the baby's health. They didn't offer to come over. They just shifted the weight onto my shoulders and walked away, at least emotionally. I had no parenting experience, no plan, and barely enough savings to cover my own bills. But I also had something my family didn't, a sense of responsibility that didn't evaporate when things got hard. So I learned. I took on extra work. I read books, joined parenting forums, and stood in line at clinics with other exhausted parents who knew what it meant to put a child first. Slowly, my home became his home, my life became his life, and I made a promise to myself, no matter what happened, I would never let him feel abandoned again. Over the years, my parents never visited, not once. Birthdays, holidays, school plays, they skipped them all. When my sister resurfaced briefly through social media, she didn't even ask about her son. It was as though they had all agreed to erase him from their lives entirely. I stopped sending photos. I stopped updating them. Protecting him meant keeping him far from people who saw him as a problem to be passed along. Then, almost a decade later, they came back, not with apologies, but with a lawsuit. They claimed I had kept the boy from them, that I'd poisoned him against his own blood. They painted themselves as loving grandparents cruelly shut out of his life. It was a stunning display of hypocrisy, but I stayed calm, because I knew something they didn't. I had kept every message, every piece of proof, every record of their absence. And when the day of the hearing came, I walked into that courtroom with a sealed folder under my arm. The judge glanced at it, raised an eyebrow, and asked quietly, "Do they even know what you have?" I just nodded, and for the first time in 10 years, I was ready not to defend myself but to tell the truth. Raising a child alone changes you in ways nothing else can. I went from a man who could barely keep his own fridge stocked to someone who could pack a school lunch in under 3 minutes while reciting multiplication tables. I learned to juggle work, homework help, and the kind of bedtime stories that turn a long day into a safe night. I learned patience, the kind that holds steady through tantrums, late-night fevers, and tears you can't fully explain. But I also learned something darker, how little my family's love extended beyond words. For the first year, I sent them updates out of habit, photos of his first steps, his first tooth, his first birthday cake with more frosting than cake. They never responded, no phone call, no visit, not even a card in the mail. At first, I told myself they were busy, but deep down, I knew the truth. They had written him off the moment they handed him to me. By the time he was old enough to ask about them, I had to choose my words carefully. I didn't lie, but I didn't poison him with the bitterness I felt. I told him they lived far away, that sometimes adults don't know how to be there the way they should. It was easier than explaining the uglier truth, that they had abandoned him before they'd ever really met him. Still, I kept everything, every text message where they brushed me off, every email where I asked for help and was ignored, screenshots of my sister posting about vacations while I was buying diapers on a credit card, bank transfers showing it was me paying for everything, down to the last school uniform. I didn't know why I was saving it all, only that it felt important, like evidence in a trial I didn't yet know was coming. So when the lawsuit landed on my desk, claiming I had kept him from them, the absurdity hit me like a punch. They hadn't just forgotten, they had rewritten the story entirely. In their version, they were the loving grandparents, and I was the villain who shut them out. But the truth wasn't just on my side, it was in black and white. in timestamps and paper trails they didn't realize I had been guarding for 10 years. Walking into that courtroom, I wasn't nervous. I was steady, because this wasn't just about winning custody. This was about making sure the boy I'd raised knew the truth, that when the world walked out on him, I stayed, and now, finally, the world would hear it too. The days leading up to the hearing weren't frantic, they were methodical. I treated this like building a house. First, the foundation, the timeline. I laid out in order every significant event since the day my sister left her son on my doorstep. From the first doctor's appointment to his latest school report card, I marked exactly where they had been, which was nowhere. Then came the framework, the communications, or more accurately, the lack of them. I compiled a decade's worth of unanswered messages, ignored voicemails, and empty promises. I highlighted the few times they did respond, each one dismissive, each one proof they wanted nothing to do with the child unless it was convenient for them. I also gathered witnesses, not friends who would take my side out of loyalty, but neutral third parties, teachers, neighbors, a pediatrician who had seen me show up alone at every checkup for 10 years. These were people who could speak to what they had seen with their own eyes, not just what I told them. The last piece was the sealed folder. Inside was the kind of proof that didn't just refute their claims, it demolished them. Financial records showing I had covered every cost, photos and receipts time-stamped on every birthday and holiday, and most damning of all, a series of emails from my sister herself, written in the first year, explicitly saying she couldn't handle motherhood and wanted me to just keep him. Those words alone were enough to cut through any performance they might try to put on in court. I kept my preparations quiet. I didn't tell friends, didn't vent on social media, didn't even hint at what was coming. Let them walk into that courtroom thinking they were going to blindside me. I wanted them confident. I wanted them certain, because certainty makes people sloppy, and sloppy people make mistakes in front of a judge. On the morning of the hearing, I wasn't just prepared, I was calm in a way that felt almost dangerous. This wasn't anger anymore, it was precision. I had spent 10 years raising a boy they forgot existed. Now I was about to make sure the law remembered everything they had done to abandon him. The courtroom was smaller than I expected, but the air inside felt heavy. My parents sat across the aisle, dressed in their Sunday best. My sister between them, her hair neatly done, her expression carefully composed. They looked like a family in mourning, not for a person, but for a narrative they were about to lose. Their lawyer spoke first, painting them as heartbroken grandparents who had been denied their rightful place in their grandson's life. He used words like alienation and estrangement, letting them hang in the air as though I had committed some calculated cruelty. My sister sat with her head bowed, playing the role of the reformed mother who had been kept away by my stubbornness. When it was my turn, I didn't rush. I stood, straightened my tie, and looked directly at the judge. "Your Honor," I began, my voice steady, "I will not argue emotion today. I will only present facts." And with that, I slid the sealed folder onto the table. The sound it made was louder than paper should sound, and every eye in the room followed it. The judge leaned forward, breaking the seal. As he flipped through the contents, bank statements, time-stamped photos, unanswered emails, his brow furrowed. Then came the email from my sister, dated just 2 months after she had abandoned her child. "I can't do this. You just keep him. I'll try to get my life together." The judge read it twice. When he looked up, his voice was quieter but sharper. "Do they even know what you have here?" I simply nodded. Across the aisle, my parents shifted in their seats. My sister's face lost its composure, her lips tightening as she glanced toward their lawyer. That was the first crack, a silent exchange that told me their confidence was faltering. Their attorney tried to recover, questioning whether my evidence told the full story. But the more he pressed, the more obvious it became that their story was just that, a version of events built on selective memory and missing details. Every time they claimed they'd tried to see the boy, I countered with a documented instance where I'd invited them and they'd declined. Each page of the folder was another chisel to the foundation of their case. By the time the morning session ended, the judge's expression had changed. This wasn't about a messy family dispute anymore. This was about a pattern of abandonment laid bare in black and white, and they knew it. When the court reconvened after lunch, the air felt different. My parents avoided my eyes. My sister clung to her lawyer's sleeve like a lifeline. Whatever confidence they'd walked in with that morning had drained away, leaving behind only a nervous stillness. Their lawyer tried one last push, leaning heavily on the argument that family unity was in the child's best interest. He spoke about the importance of grandparents, of a mother's bond with her son, and how time apart should be healed, not cemented. It was a plea for sentiment, not a case built on reality. The judge turned to me. "Mr. Ellison, do you have a response?" I didn't look at my parents or my sister. I kept my eyes on the judge and said, "Your Honor, I agree that family is important, but so is consistency, safety and trust. For 10 years, I have been the one feeding him, clothing him, reading to him at night. For 10 years, they have been absent by choice. That's not a bond, that's a void, and it's not my job to fill it for them now." I then called my first witness, his teacher from 2nd grade. She spoke about how I was the one who attended every parent-teacher meeting, the one who responded to every call, the one who encouraged him when he struggled. "I've never once met his mother," she said, "and I've never seen his grandparents." Her words landed like stones in still water. Next came his pediatrician, who testified that in a decade of visits it was always me signing the forms, making the payments, and sitting beside the boy in the waiting room. She confirmed there had never been any inquiry or involvement from the rest of the family. Every piece of testimony reinforced the same truth. I wasn't just his guardian, I was his only consistent parent. The judge didn't interrupt, didn't question, just listened, his pen scratching notes in deliberate strokes. My sister, meanwhile, stared at the table, her knuckles white around the tissue in her hand. By the time my witnesses were done, the narrative had shifted entirely. This wasn't about me keeping them apart. It was about them never trying to be there in the first place, and everyone in that courtroom knew it. When both sides rested, the judge took a long pause before speaking. He set down his pen, folded his hands, and looked first at my parents, then at my sister. "This court has reviewed the evidence," he said, his tone measured but heavy, "and the pattern is undeniable. For a decade this child has been under the sole care of Mr. Ellison. There is no credible proof that the petitioners made consistent efforts to be involved in his life. In fact, the evidence suggests the opposite, that they chose to disengage." I could see my sister start to tremble. My mother whispered something to her, but it was drowned out by the judge's next words. "Custody remains solely with Mr. Ellison. The petition for visitation is denied at this time, with the option to revisit only if substantial and sustained effort is demonstrated." He let the words settle like a stone dropped in deep water. That should have been the end, but my father, never one to accept defeat quietly, stood and said, "Your Honor, this isn't fair. He's poisoned the boy against us." The judge didn't raise his voice, but the weight of his glare was enough to silence the room. "Sir, the only thing poisoning this relationship has been your absence. Sit down." The air shifted in that moment. It was over. They had come in expecting to take something from me, and they were leaving with less than they'd started with. No custody, no court-mandated visitation, and no moral high ground. Their attempt to paint themselves as victims had backfired spectacularly, and now it was on the record. As we gathered our papers, their lawyer leaned over to my sister and whispered something urgent. She glanced at me with a look that was half fury, half humiliation. I didn't return it. I didn't need to. The truth had been spoken, the lies dismantled, and the boy I had raised was still mine to protect. Walking out of that courtroom, I felt no triumph, no gloating satisfaction, just a deep, steady relief. For 10 years I'd been holding my breath, waiting for the day they'd try to come back and take what they'd abandoned. That day had come and passed. That night, after the courthouse was a memory and the papers were filed away, I sat my son down at our kitchen table, the same table where he'd done his homework, built Lego castles, and once spilled an entire gallon of orange juice. He was 10 now, old enough to understand more than I had ever wanted him to. He looked at me with that quiet curiosity he gets when he knows something important is coming. "Is this about today?" he asked. I nodded. "Yeah, it's time you knew the whole story." I didn't sugarcoat it, but I didn't sharpen it into cruelty either. I told him how his mother had left him with me when he was a baby, how my parents had said he was my responsibility, how they had chosen not to be part of his life, even when I tried to keep the door open. His eyes didn't well up with tears. Instead, they narrowed with a kind of understanding that felt older than his years. So, they just didn't want me? The question cut deep, but I answered honestly. They didn't know how to be there for you, and that's not your fault. It never was. I told him about the lawsuit, how they had tried to convince a judge to take him from me. I told him about the folder, how every photo, every receipt, every unanswered message was proof that I had fought for him every day since he came into my care. His expression shifted then, and for the first time I saw something like pride in his eyes. "I'm glad you're my dad," he said, his voice steady. "Even if you're not my dad." That was the moment I felt everything settle inside me. All the legal battles, the sleepless nights, the years of carrying both of our lives on my shoulders, they were worth it for that one sentence. We stayed at the table for hours after that, talking about everything and nothing, planning what we'd do this weekend, like it was just another normal night. Because in a way it was. The difference was, for the first time in 10 years, we didn't have to look over our shoulders. The fight was over. The morning after our talk, I called my lawyer. The case was over, but I knew enough about my family to understand they might try again someday, maybe under a different angle or with a different story. I wasn't about to give them the chance. "I want everything airtight," I told him. "Custody, guardianship, the works. I want it in writing so ironclad that not even a miracle could undo it." Over the next few weeks, we fortified every legal wall around my son's life. Adoption papers, updated wills, contingency plans if anything ever happened to me. We even set up a trust in his name that wouldn't be accessible until he turned 21, ensuring his future couldn't be touched by anyone but him. Each signed document felt like another lock clicking into place. But it wasn't just about keeping my family out. It was about making sure my son had everything he needed to step into adulthood without the shadows of the past dragging at his heels. I started a savings account for his education, quietly contributing every month. I upgraded our health insurance, made sure his medical needs were covered for years to come. I didn't tell him about most of it yet. Some gifts are better revealed when the time is right. Outside of the paperwork, life returned to a peaceful rhythm. We went back to our routines, school drop-offs, weekend breakfasts, his soccer games on Saturdays. But I carried a quiet satisfaction now, knowing that behind the calm surface, every safeguard was in place. They could bang on the gates all they wanted. There was no way in. My parents and sister stayed silent. Whether it was shame, fear, or strategy, I didn't know. But I could imagine their conversations, the blame being passed around like a hot coal. They had walked into court expecting to rewrite history, and walked out having etched the truth into stone. That truth wasn't going anywhere. I didn't feel anger toward them anymore, just distance, a deep, unshakable distance that couldn't be bridged. And with that distance came something I hadn't felt in years: freedom. It was 3 years after the custody battle when I saw her again. I was in the grocery store, grabbing a bag of coffee and some bread, when I turned down the next aisle, and there she was, my sister. Her hair was different, her clothes worn, and she looked older than her age. Life had clearly taken its toll, but when her eyes met mine, there was no spark of recognition for the bond we once shared as siblings. She hesitated, then forced a smile. "Mark," she said softly, as if testing my name on her tongue. I nodded, keeping my face calm. I wasn't going to offer a hug or a warm memory to bridge the years. Those bridges had been burned long before. We exchanged small talk. She asked about work, about the boy. I didn't give her more than the surface. He's doing well, I said, leaving it at that. I didn't owe her the details of his achievements, his kindness, or the young man he was becoming. She had forfeited that right when she walked away. At one point, she sighed. "You know, I think about him sometimes." The words landed awkwardly, like an apology that didn't know where to start. But before I could respond, she added, "I just wish things had been different." It wasn't regret for what she had done. It was regret for what she had lost access to. I realized then that she hadn't changed. She still wanted the story without having lived the reality. She wanted the title of mother without the years of sacrifice it demanded. And I wasn't going to give her even the illusion of that. We parted ways in that aisle without a handshake, without a promise to stay in touch. As I walked to the checkout, I knew that encounter would be the last time I'd see her. Some people exit your life loudly, with slammed doors and shouted words. Others simply fade into the background until they're gone entirely. She was the latter, and I was fine with that. By the time he turned 16, my son had started asking sharper questions. Teenagers have a way of sensing what's left unsaid, and he wasn't content with the soft edges of the story I'd given him when he was younger. One night after dinner, he sat across from me, his plate pushed aside. "Dad," he said, "I want to know everything, not the short version, all of it." I looked at him, taller now, voice deeper, but still with that same unwavering gaze he'd had as a child. It wasn't about curiosity anymore. It was about identity. He wanted to understand the truth, so he could decide for himself who he was and who he wanted to be connected to. So I told him. I laid it all out. The morning his mother left him on my doorstep, the way my parents told me he was my burden, the years of silence, the lawsuit and the sealed folder that had ended it all. I even showed him some of the documents, the ignored messages, the receipts, the emails from his mother. His expression hardened as he read, but he didn't interrupt. When I finished, there was a long silence. Then he leaned back in his chair and said, "I'm glad you kept them away." His voice didn't carry bitterness, just certainty. "If they didn't want me then, I don't want them now. I've got my family. You." Hearing that felt like a weight sliding off my chest. I had carried so much of the past alone, always wondering if one day he'd resent me for the choices I made. But in that moment, I knew he understood. Not just the facts, but the heart behind them. From then on, there was no more wondering, no more shadow over our lives. The past was still there, but it was behind us, not hanging over us. He'd made his choice, and in doing so, he gave me something I'd been chasing for over a decade: peace. Years have passed since that day in court. My son is an adult now, steady, capable, and building a life entirely his own. He still calls me Dad, without hesitation, and every time I hear it, I'm reminded that titles are earned, not given. The years we spent together weren't defined by blood, but by choice. My choice to stay, his choice to trust. The sealed folder from that trial still sits on a high shelf in my office. I haven't opened it since the verdict. I keep it not because I need it, but because it represents something important. Proof, not just for the court, but for myself, that I did everything I could, that when the people who should have stood with me turned their backs, I carried the weight alone and didn't let it crush either of us. Sometimes, when I'm in that office late at night, I glance at the folder and think about what might have happened if I hadn't kept those records, if I hadn't been ready when they came for him. That thought makes me grateful for every meticulous step I took, every scrap of evidence I held onto. Preparedness isn't paranoia. Sometimes it's the only thing standing between you and losing everything. My parents never tried again. My sister never reappeared after that grocery store encounter. Whatever story they tell themselves now, it's theirs to live with. I don't hate them. I don't think about them much at all. My energy belongs to the life we've built, not the people who abandoned it. The boy who was once left crying in a blanket on my doorstep is now a man, charting his own path. He's not defined by the people who walked away, but by the person who stayed and by the strength he's grown for himself. If I've done my job right, he'll never need that folder. But if the world ever tries to rewrite his story again, he'll have the truth in ink, in paper, and in me. And maybe that's the quietest victory of all. Not winning in court, not proving anyone wrong, but knowing that in the end, we wrote our own story, and we made sure no one else could take the pen.